the Sustainable Development Goals compels all governments to mobilize resources domestically. So it is important as we discuss the debt issue, because it then forces government to be more inward looking in terms of where do we get the resources to be able to finance and achieve and implement the Sustainable Development Goals. It then means part of what government has to do is to be able to strike that balance between how do we achieve these commitments that we have made in a manner that is sustainable. And the SDGs are calling for a manner that is sustainable, that is moving government away from borrowing, that is saying, look within yourselves. What capacities do you have? What resources do you have? How do you leverage on them so that you can deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals? So as way of recommendations, touching on the various discussions that we have had and what we are envisaging seeing government doing moving forward, we are saying for debt relief to benefit the poor, government needs to channel those funds in the infrastructure, public goods and capital projects that will stimulate economic growth. If government gets money from IMF and it develops infrastructure that then connects the rural farmer to the next growth point where they can sell their products, it means they are benefiting. It means there's a long-term benefit that comes from that. And that's where the people are. So if government attracts that debt, those funds, they have to go directly into where people are. One of our challenge as a country, or the challenge that government has, is the inability to diversify the revenue sources. We are very parochial, just looking in one direction. We have no money, what do? We engage IMF. We have no money, what do? We engage Africa Development Bank. But what resources do we have? What other sources? Which is what the SDGs are saying. Look around yourself. What sources of resources do you have? How can you leverage on them? And in that regard, I think government needs to invest, for example, in agriculture, in tangible ways, in sustainable ways, to invest in mining in ways that don't make us export our tobacco raw, and it creates jobs elsewhere. In a manner that does not make us export our diamonds raw, and they create jobs elsewhere. But the government then needs to invest in the value chains that exist in some of those sectors, so that jobs are created locally, so that revenue is generated, and it can then build our economy. When we talk about poverty reduction, it's not an act that can be done by one entity. It cannot be done by government alone. So in developing the poverty reduction or alleviation strategy, government has to take a multi-stakeholder, a multi-sectoral approach. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Civil society organizations, community-based organizations, private sector, in one way or another, are already working around issues of poverty reduction. Government can leverage on that. It can leverage on that, and it can help by creating a conducive environment that ensures that civil society can do their work, private sector, and every other person can do their work to contribute towards poverty reduction. And so in concluding, I acknowledge that no country lives in isolation and can be able to meet its needs by itself, by its own resources. So yes, countries attract debt, but when countries do attract that debt, it has to be underpinned, it has to be motivated by the principle of the common good. When we do that, the inequality that we talked about, which is widening on a day-to-day basis, if we are pushed by the common good, the national common good, it then means everybody will benefit. The inequality gap will be reduced. And so we need, as a country, to ensure that our risk premium is reduced. We network and work and ensure that the development process is a multi-stakeholder process that takes us all into the picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judith. It's great to see that we are already ready to engage. Again, let me seek your indulgence and say let's go up to 1:30. What is also happening is SlyMedia are live streaming this on Facebook. And remember, we did say we have Capital, it's called Capital FM, right? Sure. Also streaming this. And what is happening is that those that are not here are also asking questions. So we would also want to give the panelists the opportunity to respond to those questions that are being asked elsewhere. And for the benefit of those that are viewing from 4 corners of the world, my name is Joy Mabenge. I just had to bring that in. Saki, Ngoma Masimba? Yes. So there are 2 Masimba, Masimba Manyanya and Masimba Kuchera, in that order. And my sister here.
I just wanted to contribute by sharing a comment or a point of information. We need to unmask the issue that debt is necessary for the purposes of funding social services. It's been coming in a very quiet way, but we just need to put it on the table. But also the issue of funding of social services. It's a real issue, particularly when we look at where's the money for women's rights or where's the money for, Cyclone Idai, etc., etc. But I want to inform the House that actually our system, or our boring technical system of governance, has what we call statutory funds. And there are statutory funds for almost every line item for social services. And those statutory funds are never accounted for. So we are constantly looking for well-wishers when there is a problem around social sectors that need alleviation. But that money is there, but nobody asks where that money is. And when we say we want money to do social things, we are now supposed to allegedly be supporting the drive for debt. So let's just remind ourselves that actually there is money. It's called statutory funds. You don't need to get a well-wisher to get women who've been trafficked from Kuwait to be brought back to Zimbabwe. There is a fund. The Anti-Human Trafficking Fund collects $50 a day from every infraction that happens at the border post. Where is that money? We're supposed to be getting pens from schools. We actually pay from it. The publishers, or the printers, all of those people, their taxes go to contribute to what is known as the Learning Fund. There's $3 million a month. Where is that money going? So can we please separate the issue of social services drive the need for debt? They don't. They don't drive the need for debt. It's your failure to be accountable around the monies that you already get, that you don't borrow from anybody, that we are contributing to every day, that drive that need. So women do not drive the need for debt. Let's be clear. The second issue is to underscore the contribution that Mkoma Brian raised around the access to information. We need our state entities, whether it is ZIMRA, whether it is Ministry of Finance, whether it is a parastatal, to do automated reporting. We should not have to have a situation where access to information, we must beg, borrow, negotiate, plead, and make citizens vulnerable simply because they're asking for public data or public information. A simple thing, just simply saying to someone, can any parastatal tell us how many men and women they have on their boards? What more when you start asking simple questions like how much money, who are you currently negotiating with, what is the debt that is there, can we see a copy of the deal? It becomes really, really difficult because there is no practice of a good practice of democracy. The practice of democracy we have around access to information is so poor that asking for public information, you are met with all the things of, no, it is a state secret. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think my question is for Titus. Titus, what's your take on the view that tax evasions and transfer pricing by large foreign-owned multinational corporations remain the biggest contributor to resource outflows from developing countries, which is indirectly contributing to the mushrooming of the debt?
Thank you very much. Two questions. One to Brian. It's a data question. Now, my question is this. One of the things that the data says, which is talked about all the time, is that it restricts Americans from voting for any development assistance. But it doesn't encourage them to vote against any development assistance. And so, in that regard, how does it then become a problem? Because then there is the idea of abstention, which they can probably easily do. My question to Titus. You talked about, you gave us a few case studies. And I want to assume that Zambia first borrowed before Mozambique on account of copper resources. But Mozambique still went to borrow. Now, I think it's Talleyrand who said they had learned nothing and forgot nothing. Do you think these countries learn anything? If Zimbabwe finds resources today, do you think they'll learn from Zambia? Do you think they'll learn from Mozambique? And if they are not going to do that willingly, how best can we be able to chip in and say, look, our friends in Zambia, our friends in Mozambique, our friends in this place are warning us, or these are the signs. Because as they are saying, if you have money in your pocket, you become excited. You become excited to the extent that you want to enjoy pizza that you have not eaten in 10 months. You want to buy the latest car and show off to your newly found friends. How do we mitigate against that? Looking at how our government has operated in the past. I hesitate to call it a new dispensation for me, because it's coming out of an old dispensary. So you can't have a new dispensation coming from an old dispensary. But what I'm saying is, how do we as civil society start working on that and ensuring that we don't have a situation where we repeat mistakes of others?
Thank you very much. My question is directed to Titus Oxfam. Thank you very much for the case study of Mozambique, Zambia. And I think also Zimbabwe has not been spared from the pre-source case, from Tonell's voracity effect, and the case around extractives. I understand also Zimbabwe has an Afrexim Bank, 150 million gold-backed facility, and we've also been informed of the Chinese government being contracted to build the new parliament building backed by gold, some diamond facilities too. I want to find out from you, how far has Oxfam International gained traction, as much as you have done in Mozambique, to also be involved in such issues in Zimbabwe?
Okay, we do not have to keep asking questions if there are none to ask. So this one will be the last one, right?
Thank you for all the wonderful presentations. I think Titus and Brian, you spoke largely about the issue of stewardship. And I also believe that Zimbabwe is not in short of resources, but this is the fundamental problem that we have been facing for the past 38 years. But then my question is, how do you see the current policy trajectory where we are having policy changes, reforms being announced outside the country, in America and so forth? We have had the Indigenization and Economic Empowerment Act being amended, but the announcement comes even without consultation of the stakeholders, within the country. What does it mean in terms of the future policy trajectory of the country? Thank you.
Thank you for the good questions. 2 minutes each to the panelists, and in those 2 minutes, your parting shots.
Masimba, thank you. The ZEDERA has several provisions, and one of the provisions is the provision that actually lists what entities are affected by the so-called sanctions. And these include the Agribank, IDC, Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe, MMCZ, ZB Financial Holdings, Intermarket, Scotfin, Zisco, Zimbabwe Mining Development, and so on and so forth. And the other bit is actually that what you have within the multilaterals is the US vote is not an ordinary vote, at least in the 4 big lenders. Once the US does not vote with any of the debt proposed, it essentially means that everybody reads the body language. But there is more that's more explicit. The amendment to ZEDERA, the current amendment, actually says we will withhold from Africa Development Bank or the Africa Development Fund the amount equivalent to whatever is given to Zimbabwe for purposes of dealing with its current economic position. And I think that, look, we may differ on the moral and ethical questions around the issues of flagrant violations of human rights, impunity, the use of violence, militarization, conflation of state, and so on and so forth. But I think that it is not possible for you, because these entities are some of the harbingers of the national debt. They're some of the areas of accumulation of the national debt. And so what essentially we have is, you can cut your nose in order to spite your face. Or as they say in my language, cut your nose because it has mucus in it. Right? And I don't think that resolves the problem. I would want us to have an international accountability framework for the excesses that we experience in Zimbabwe, but also want us to have the fiscal and policy space for us to be able to recover. And this is not simply to borrow, but to reschedule some of the debt in meaningful ways. It doesn't matter which government is in power. As long as you have this legislation in the manner that it is in, it's going to be very difficult, if not near impossible. The one thing I wanted to say that I forgot to mention, and that's my parting shot, Joy, is that humanitarian crises such as Cyclone Idai create what is called the unseen debt glut, okay? That means the country is yet to fully assess the full cost to infrastructure, the full cost to human beings and the economy of the humanitarian crisis. So the debt figures that we got were debt figures pre-Cyclone Idai. Post-Cyclone Idai, the evaluation of the debt would have to take into account you literally have to pretend as though there was no infrastructure in the affected region or regions. That to rebuild that infrastructure as a cost to state. And in rebuilding that infrastructure, you then have to give it a quantification of the cost of reconstruction. That is equivalent to the amount you'll add to the current debt that you have. Whether you do it by private-public partnership or you do it through well-wishers or so on and so forth. So why am I raising this issue? It essentially means when we steal from the statutory funds that Sakile is talking about, we are essentially stealing from the future, right? And also stealing from the... So the statutory funds that were diverted and not used to make us risk resilient or disaster resilient, we will now have to pay almost 100 times for the post-recovery phase. So stewardship is about not living for today and eating everything that you have. It's about seeing the future and anticipating. With climate change, and I think it's Titus who raised the issue, we have to budget not only for hand-to-mouth needs, we have to budget for these climate variabilities and other factors that we need to take into account. And I am not a rocket scientist. I suspect, fellow citizens, that we will have to borrow significantly to reconstruct a significant portion of Manicaland and some of the Ipo Valley areas and other areas that were affected by Cyclone Idai.
Thank you, comrades. If I would, what you're seeing with climate change isn't also the role that extractives play in increasing carbon emissions into the atmosphere, but it's what the climate change is doing to erode our ability to produce through agriculture. Because what's being destroyed are farms, agriculture, the same sector that we're supposed to turn around and use to feed our countries. We are losing that capacity, partly because of what's happening with climate change. So the true impact is going to be staggering, and I do think we have not fully thought through what will happen. It does affect me as a citizen that African countries haven't done that much in contributing to the carbon emissions. The countries that are doing that, the companies that are doing that, and they are known. You can track carbon emissions by company and by country. The countries that are largely responsible for that, we call them donors who give us $10 million for the catastrophe that is happening through climate change. So it's also how we are going to have a conversation around debt and responsibility for carbon emissions by companies and by countries. Now, for the few questions that I've received, tax evasion, tax avoidance, illicit financial flows, this is a very important conversation. I'm happy at the African Union, people are getting serious about this Thabo Mbeki report, and I think there's growing discussion. But my only worry is, this is a global fight. You can't address this just by Zimbabwe alone, because tax havens are in Delaware. Delaware is a tax haven. British overseas territories are tax havens. So we have to address certain things and certain legislation in Europe, in North America, which makes it easy for money to be transferred, illicit money to be transferred and kept in jurisdictions in which we have no control over. So this is a global fight. But it's also a local fight in terms of our own capacity sometimes. It is not often that I see fully staffed and equipped financial intelligence units or transfer pricing units. In fact, in many of our countries we work with ATAF, there are just not enough specialized units to address issues to do with transfer pricing or proper capacity around cost audits. So we also have to beef up our own capacity to be able to investigate and track this. Guys, this is a complicated fight. Companies are employing some of the best lawyers and accountants to ensure that they pay the least amount of money to address this. And what do? We respond through employees with 1 or 2 years of experience in auditing or something. Many of them are so abused and so underpaid. When they are in meetings with these lawyers, they are actually dreaming of joining them on the other side. And so we have to address the issues around incentives of people who are doing this work, but we also have to address issues around how do we address this international unfairness that we see in the market. So this is a big argument. Whether or not countries are learning, some of it is also a function of information. The access to information, conversation, transparency is a critical issue. We just don't have the information. I mean, a lot of the conversations that we have about Zimbabwe, whether it's loans or we just don't have access to the information. And so as a starting point, contract or open transparency, open contracting is a critical issue. Open bidding, loan agreements, contracts. If you don't know what is happening in Zimbabwe, you don't know what is happening in Zambia. You cannot compare. If you go on the internet right now, you can easily compare Senegal and Ghana because those countries are disclosing. And so when you are so secretive and opaque, you also lose the ability to learn from others. And others may also not help you. Maybe we are negotiating with Vale, which has negotiated with Mozambique. But if Mozambique doesn't know how you are structuring your deals, they may not help you because they don't know how you're doing it. The companies that are negotiating in Zimbabwe, most of them are negotiating in many areas. But because we think we can do it all by ourselves, we believe in secrecy, we just don't learn enough. So I do think access to information and opening our books and ensuring that open contracting is a critical element of our financial management, I think is going to be crucial. And of course, ourselves as civil society, I think we have to facilitate this. Cross-regional learning, cross-country learning. You are seeing this with convening around SADC, around AU. If the governments are not going to do that, then we have to force them to do that by sharing across countries, sharing experiences of what it is to experience company A versus company B. If Vale is brutal in Malawi, but kind in Mozambique, we have to hold Vale's feet to the fire to say, why are you doing this in Mozambique when you don't do it in Kenya? And so we can only do this, and we have the ability and space and bandwidth to do that as civil society. Political trajectory vis-a-vis announcing things beyond. I think this is part of where we're thinking through as a country. You know, there's a fetish for foreign direct investment. And so much of our policy making is done to impress foreign direct investment. It's as if we can't do without this. It's a fetish. And so we are then doing all this, not because it is good for us, but it may impress an investor. And an investor can smell blood. An investor can smell a desperate finance minister or a desperate government. Which is why when you are a poor, struggling country, you tend to attract mafia type of investors. The ones that are going to take you to the cleaners. And so it is very important to think strategically around the kind of deals that we're entering into and the kind of investors. I mean, many of them, you can't even find them on Google, for goodness sake. I mean, try to look for this Mr. Yoon, you can't find him, Mr. This. You won't find them in LinkedIn, on Google, on Bing. They are nowhere to be seen. It's like a cowboy investor. And I think the first thing is to think, listen, without FDI, we have conversation to have as a country, whether in terms of how we run our countries, whether it's run our companies. Until we have that conversation, there is nothing that you're going to tell an FDI investor that's going to impress us. So think around issues of who we are before we bother about FDI. I do think before FDI, we have to address that. And even if FDI comes, which is going to be brutal, it's not going to work. Right now, Mozambique owns about 780 million to VTB, which is a Russian bank linked to Putin. They will have to pay that money. I mean, with Putin, he doesn't play games. They will have to pay through arm and leg because of that. And because they were impressed by all kinds of things. So I do think, listen, go beyond FDI, address your own system, address state capacity, state integrity, and be serious around these things. And then when you negotiate, it's all going to be easier. But then above all, I think our own system, which is more consultative. You know, we want to see more of such forum happening, whether it's within parliament, civil society, or so. And we come up with policies and then we engage. I would rather we delay certain deals until we agree on how we are going to work than rush into signing deals that are going to be very difficult to get out of. I will tell you there are countries like Tanzania, I could give you a whole host of countries, which are struggling to get out of deals they were locked into. You know, when negotiators are negotiating, they know one day you may change your mind. And so it's very difficult to walk out of certain deals the moment you sign them. So I would rather we delay. Manage citizen expectations, but you delay signing certain things until you are ready and until you are on solid footing so that you don't get into deep trouble. Last point is on Oxfam. Of course, we try to work in different countries. I'll give you an example for Malawi. Malawi, we are working with the government of Malawi to actually renegotiate all their oil agreements. And the Ministry of Finance across Africa happens to your friend. If you are a civil society, most Ministry of Finance guys are actually your friends because they want money. Eh? They want tax. They don't want to be poor. So my sense and experience working with most Ministry of Finance is most of the guys are actually guys you can talk to. So when you approach them, don't assume that they don't know what you're talking about, or they are angry with you, or they don't understand. Deep down their hearts, most of them are good patriots who are actually trying to negotiate in a very complicated situation. And then what we have to do, organizations ourselves like yours, is to support and strengthen the hands of reformers in our different governments. Most of them are fighting losing battles. No one sees them, no one supports them, no one appreciates them. We have seen the Auditor General coming up with really courageous reports, and sometimes it's good to just say, we see what you're doing and we commend you for that. Thank you for doing this, and let's make sure that we elevate, commend, and find ways of incentivizing the reformers or islands of excellence that we experience in a sea of mediocrity. That's one of the things that we can do to help with the situation. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Judith? No, Judith? Oh, okay. Oh.
Sorry, to the members of parliament, I was critical of you, but I think in the region, you are deemed to be doing better than a lot of others. So I would like you to understand that my call was for you to go beyond. Self-celebration is the ritual of the dead. That's why ancestors are worshipped, and when you are alive, no one worships you. So once you start celebrating yourself as parliamentarians, you are now an ancestral institution. So I just wanted to comment. The second thing I wanted to say is that the biggest challenge with Cyclone Idai is not just the destruction of infrastructure. A lot of mining activities that happened in the Manicaland region, there was use of cyanide and other pollutants. And what the water has done is it will cause a lot of that poisonous stuff to percolate into the water table much quicker. So we need to be looking out at the possible public health implications of the challenge that we're talking about. And we also need as parliament to don't wait for the end. Then we know there's corruption going on, there's partisan hijack going on of materials that are being given. I think Parliament needs to kick in its oversight role to ensure that well-wishers don't in the future hold back their generosity for want of accountability. I think Parliament must show its hand in ensuring that not a single person, not a single public administrator, not a single political actor hijacks this particular moment. I wanted to reiterate that because from now into the future, we're going to face certain natural and man-made disasters where we'll need the goodwill of citizens. And the better we show that we are strong on ensuring accountability, we will ensure that citizens continue to give from their hearts.
And I think I will just end by saying that as a country, we do not have control over external resources, but we have control over our own resources. And I strongly believe that we do have adequate resources, adequate capacities to change the current socio-economic situation that is bedeviling us. But what we require is a political willingness, not just for politicians, but a political willingness from all of us to say it can be business as usual and we can change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we please give them a round of applause? So thank you very much to the esteemed panelists. You did a great job. We took a little longer than we were supposed to, but I guess it's okay. It's not so many at times that we get the opportunity to engage on these key issues. So thank you very much, Titus. Thank you very much, Judith. Thank you very much, Brian. We really appreciate your input, and thanks to the engagement that we had. Before we break for lunch, I just want to let you know that we have one session before a media. Okay. Before a press conference, we have one session, one very important session that is going to be complementing what we have been talking about since morning. And we are looking forward to great analysis using gender lenses from Nancy Kachingwe, who is a gender activist and gender expert. And we are also looking forward to the nexus between debt and human rights, to be presented by none other than Depros Muchena. And we're looking forward to the legitimacy question in the debt contraction process and applicability in Zimbabwe. We continue with parliamentary lenses from the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Honorable Priscilla Misairambwi Mishonga. So please, after lunch, do come back. Let's do it this way. Let's cut short our lunch break unless something prohibits us from doing so. Let's have 45 minutes and be back here by, I guess it's going to be 2:30, right? 2:30, so that we just get on with our sessions and get done. Thank you so much for your attention. Lunch is upstairs at the pavilion. I don't know about tickets or something, but is it upstairs? Sure. Thanks.